The keys to my parents' house felt foreign in my hand as I walked up the driveway. I'd been gone for 4 years, serving overseas, and the silence of the suburban street was a stark contrast to the world I'd just left. The first thing I noticed was the garage door. It was wide open, a dark, gaping mouth. My stomach dropped. That's where she was supposed to be, my 1969 Mustang Mach-1, a cherry red, a car I'd bought as a rusted-out shell at 16 and spent every spare moment, every dollar I earned, restoring from the ground up. It was more than a car. It was my dream, my sweat, my future, and it was gone. The only thing left was a faint oil stain on the concrete, a ghost of where it once sat. My father came out of the house, a smug look on his face. "There you are," he said, not with warmth, but with an air of annoyance, as if my arrival was an inconvenience. I didn't even say hello. "Where's my car?" I asked, my voice flat, cold. He shrugged. "Oh, that old thing. We sold it." He said it so casually, like he was talking about an old lawnmower. He didn't realize that in that single moment, he had just destroyed the last shred of my respect for him. My mother and sister Tiffany appeared behind him, drawn by our voices. Tiffany had a diamond ring on her finger that practically blinded me. My mother was beaming. "Your sister's getting married," she announced. "We needed the money for the deposit on her dream venue. The car paid for that, and her dress." They didn't see me as a son who had just returned from a war zone. They saw me as a walking ATM, an asset to be liquidated for my sister's happiness. They thought because I was thousands of miles away, my property, my dream, was theirs for the taking. They genuinely believed I would understand. They were about to learn how wrong they were because they didn't just sell a car, they sold their son. And when I returned years later, I would make sure they understood the full price of that transaction. You might be asking yourself why they would do something so cruel, so heartless. To understand that, you need to understand that in my family there were 2 children, but only one was ever truly loved. My sister Tiffany just rolled her eyes, flashing her engagement ring again as if it were a weapon. "Oh, stop being so dramatic, Jake," she said, her voice dripping with the entitlement she'd worn her entire life. "It was just a stupid car. You're ruining my big announcement." My mother nodded in agreement, placing a protective arm around Tiffany. "She's right, honey. It's for the family. Your sister is getting married. That's more important than some old piece of metal. You should be happy for her, happy you could help." Help? I wasn't asked to help. I was robbed. My father crossed his arms, his expression hardening. "Listen to your mother. You've been off playing soldier for years, sending a little money home that barely covered your keep. It's time you contributed something real. We used the money for your sister. End of story." They stood there, a united front of selfishness, completely unable to comprehend what they had done. They saw my 4 years of service not as a sacrifice, but as a vacation. They saw my life's passion as a disposable asset. In their eyes, I wasn't a person. I was a resource, and my only purpose was to facilitate my sister's perfect life. My pain was an inconvenience to their celebration. I didn't shout. I didn't argue. I just stared at them, and in the silence, I made a decision. I let them believe they had won. I let them think I was the same weak boy they had always pushed around. "Okay," I said, my voice eerily calm. "Okay, I understand." But how could they understand the history behind that car? It started long before I even bought it. The pattern was set when I was 10 years old. I had spent an entire summer mowing lawns, saving up every single dollar to buy a brand new bike I had my eye on. I had $150 saved in a shoebox under my bed. The day I went to get it, the box was empty. My mother told me, without a trace of guilt, that Tiffany's ballet recital was coming up and she needed a new, expensive costume. "She has real talent, Jake," my mother had said. "A bike is just a toy. This is for her future." I watched from the audience as Tiffany twirled on stage in a glittering tutu bought with my sweat, and I understood my place. I was the worker, she was the star. My dreams were the fuel for hers. The bicycle incident was just the beginning. As we grew older, the scale of the sacrifices demanded of me simply grew larger. When I was in high school, I got a job bussing tables at a local diner. I worked every weekend, every holiday, saving for my future. I wanted to go to college to study engineering. I had a small savings account that I was slowly building, a secret little flame of hope. But secrets were impossible to keep in that house. My parents found my bank statements. Around the same time, Tiffany decided she wanted to go on a summer trip to Europe with her friends after graduation. It wasn't an educational trip, it was for Instagram photos and shopping sprees. Predictably, my parents sat me down at the kitchen table. It was the same speech, just with bigger numbers. "Jake, your sister has an amazing opportunity," my father started. "This trip could really broaden her horizons." My mother chimed in, "And you're so good at saving, honey. You've got almost $5,000 in that account. We'll pay you back, of course." I knew they wouldn't. They never did. I refused. For the first time, I told them no. The backlash was immediate. I was selfish, ungrateful, a bad brother. Tiffany cried for days, accusing me of being jealous of her popularity. They made my life a living hell until I finally caved. I walked into the bank and withdrew every penny. The look of triumph on their faces when I handed them the cash was something I'll never forget. Tiffany went to Europe and came back with a new wardrobe and a boyfriend. I stayed home and picked up extra shifts at the diner. That was the moment I gave up on them. I gave up on the idea of college, on the idea of them ever helping me. I realized that my only way out was to build something they couldn't touch, something that was so completely mine they couldn't justify taking it. That's when I found the Mustang. It was a wreck, sitting in a farmer's field, more rust than metal. But I saw its potential. I bought it with the first 3 paychecks from a new, better-paying construction job I'd taken. It became my obsession. I learned mechanics, welding, bodywork. My knuckles were always busted, my clothes stained with grease. While Tiffany was at parties, I was in the garage, rebuilding an engine. That car wasn't just metal, it was my escape. It was the proof that I could create something valuable, something beautiful, all on my own. It was my declaration of independence. And they sold it for a party dress. Standing there in the driveway, looking at the smug, united front of my family, I felt the last bit of childish hope inside me die. The hope that my service, my sacrifice, would finally earn me a sliver of their respect. I had joined the military for one reason: to get away. It was a trade. I would give the army 4 years of my life, and in return, they would give me a new life, one free from the constant drain of my family's demands. I left the Mustang in their garage as a symbol of trust, a foolish belief that they would at least respect the one thing I had ever built for myself. I had arranged for my pay to be deposited into a new account, one they didn't know about, but I sent them a few $100s a month to a joint account, telling them it was to help with bills and the upkeep of my car. I now realized they saw that money as their right, and my car as their emergency fund. Their shock at my calm, okay, was visible. They were geared up for a fight, for tears, for a screaming match where they could play the victim. My quiet acceptance disarmed them. It was like I had taken all their weapons away. I didn't raise my voice. I simply looked my father in the eye. "I'll need the bill of sale," I said, "and the name and number of the person you sold it to." My father scoffed. "Why? You thinking of buying it back? Good luck with that. You don't have that kind of money." He was enjoying this, the final nail in the coffin of my dream. He went inside and came back with a crumpled piece of paper. "Here," he grunted, shoving it into my hand. "Knock yourself out." I smoothed out the paper. They'd sold it for $15,000. It was worth at least 3 times that. They didn't even care enough to get a fair price. They just wanted quick cash for a dress. I folded the paper neatly and put it in my pocket. "Thank you," I said. I turned around and started walking back down the driveway toward the road. "Wait, where are you going?" my mother called out, a hint of confusion in her voice. "Your old room is all set up for you." I stopped but didn't turn around. "I'm not staying," I said. "I have some things to take care of." I didn't wait for a response. I just kept walking, leaving them standing there in the shadow of the empty garage. They thought they had won. They thought this was the end of the story. But for me, holding that bill of sale in my pocket, it was the beginning. It was my first piece of evidence. I didn't look back. I walked to the end of the street and called another taxi. The driver asked, "Where to?" And for a second, I had no answer. I had nowhere to go. My home was no longer my home. "The cheapest, cleanest motel you know," I finally said. He dropped me off at a sterile, anonymous place off the highway. The room smelled of bleach and regret. I sat on the edge of the stiff bed, the silence buzzing in my ears. The anger was there, a hot coil in my gut, but it was different now. It wasn't the wild, helpless rage of my youth. It was cold, focused, and patient. The army had beaten the reactivity out of me and replaced it with strategy. This wasn't a family drama anymore. This was a mission. I took out the crumpled bill of sale and smoothed it on the nightstand. Buyer's name, Stan Gable. There was a phone number. I pulled out my own phone and dialed. A gruff voice answered. I introduced myself calmly, explaining that I was the original owner of the Mustang and that it had been sold without my consent while I was deployed. Stan just laughed. "Listen, pal, I bought that car fair and square from your old man, got the signed title and everything. It's my car now. You got family problems, that's on you. Don't call me again." He hung up. My father's name was on the bill of sale, but the title had been in my name. I had left it in a lockbox in my old desk drawer just in case of an emergency, a foolish act of trust. For them to sell it, my signature had to be on that title transfer. And that's when it hit me, the full weight of their crime. This wasn't just a betrayal, it was a felony. They hadn't just sold my car, they had impersonated me to do it. They had committed title fraud and grand theft auto. My father had forged my signature. The crumpled paper in my hand wasn't just a receipt, it was proof. Stan's dismissive attitude was a gift. He had confirmed he had a title signed with my name, a signature I had never provided. A new plan began to form in my mind, far more complete and devastating than simply getting my car back. The mission objective had changed. It was no longer about recovery, it was about justice. Absolute, undeniable, and public. They thought they had taken $15,000 from me. They had no idea they had just handed me all the ammunition I would ever need to take everything from them. The next morning, I was at the DMV an hour before it opened. I stood in line, a man on a mission, surrounded by the mundane frustrations of civilian life. My military discipline served me well. The long wait, the bureaucratic shuffling, the endless forms, none of it fazed me. When my number was finally called, I walked to the counter and calmly explained the situation. I was a recently returned serviceman. My vehicle, a 1969 Mustang Mach I, VIN number rattling off my tongue from memory, was sold while I was deployed. I had reason to believe the title transfer was fraudulent, and I needed a copy of the official transaction records. My military ID and the bill of sale gave my request an air of authority. The clerk, likely used to dealing with far more chaotic situations, nodded and processed my request without issue. An hour later, I walked out with a certified copy of the title transfer document. I sat in a nearby park, the sun shining brightly, and looked at the paper. There, at the bottom, was my name. The signature was a crude, shaky imitation of my own. It was my father's handwriting trying to be mine. He hadn't even tried very hard. It was arrogant, careless, and damning. This piece of paper was the key. It was irrefutable. I folded it carefully and placed it with the bill of sale in a waterproof sleeve. These were my weapons. For the next 8 months, I vanished. I didn't answer their calls or texts. From their perspective, I had simply disappeared, likely licking my wounds like the defeated son they always knew me to be. They could now plan Tiffany's wedding without the inconvenience of my disapproval. But I wasn't licking my wounds. I was working. I took the skills I'd honed rebuilding the Mustang and leveraged my military discipline. I got a job at a high-end restoration garage that specialized in classic American muscle cars. The owner, a grizzled old veteran himself, hired me on the spot after I diagnosed a complex engine problem in 10 minutes that had his best guys stumped for a week. I worked 16-hour days, pouring all my energy, all my cold anger into my work. I lived in a small, cheap apartment, saving every single dollar. While they were spending the blood money from my car on wedding invitations and floral arrangements, I was building an empire in grease and steel. And all the while, I was planning. I knew the date of the wedding. I knew the venue. They were creating the perfect stage for their own destruction, and I was going to let them finish building it. The invitation arrived on a Tuesday. It was thick, cream-colored cardstock with gold leaf lettering, ridiculously opulent. It reeked of my money. Tucked inside was a small note, handwritten in my mother's looping cursive. "Jake," it read, "we know you're still upset, but family is forever. We hope you'll do the right thing and be there to support your sister on her big day. It would mean the world to us." There was no apology, no remorse, just a demand for my presence, a command to fall back in line and pretend everything was fine. They truly believed that after 8 months of silence, a fancy piece of paper was all it would take to erase their betrayal. That invitation was the final piece of confirmation I needed. It was time. The next morning, I walked into the local police precinct. I wasn't angry or agitated. I was calm, organized, and professional. I had a thin briefcase with me. Inside was a neatly organized file, a certified copy of the title transfer with the forged signature, a copy of the bill of sale, my military deployment orders proving I was in another hemisphere on the date of the sale, and a sworn affidavit I had prepared with a notary. I sat down with a detective, a weary-looking man named Miller, and laid it all out. I could see his initial skepticism, thinking this was just another messy family squabble, melt away as he looked at the documents. He saw the forged signature, checked the dates on my deployment orders, and his expression turned serious. "This is clean cut," he said, nodding slowly. "Title fraud is a felony, grand theft auto too." I filed the official report, naming my father, Jonathan Miller, as the perpetrator. The wheels of the law had begun to turn. My second call was to Stan Gable. This time, my tone was different. There was no request, only a statement of fact. "Stan, Jake here. I'm calling as a courtesy. The '69 Mustang in your possession has been officially reported as stolen property. I have the police report right here, case number and all. The police will be in touch to recover the vehicle. Now, you have 2 options. You can cooperate fully, return the car to my garage, and I'll ensure the DA knows you were an unwitting buyer. Or you can wait for the cops to show up at your door with a warrant, impound the car as evidence, and drag you into a felony investigation." The silence on the other end of the line was heavy. The blustering bravado was gone, replaced by the cold fear of legal trouble. "Where's your garage?" he finally mumbled. I had my car back, and my parents, still busy tasting wedding cakes, had no idea a detective was about to be assigned to their case. The day of the wedding was beautiful. The sun was shining, the birds were singing, a perfect cliché for the perfect disaster I had planned. I had spent the last few weeks meticulously working on the Mustang. Stan, eager to avoid legal trouble, had delivered it himself, along with a string of apologies. The car was my sole focus. I polished every inch of chrome until it gleamed, fine-tuned the engine until it purred with restrained power, and waxed the cherry red paint until it looked like wet blood. It was perfect. I arrived at the venue, a sprawling, ostentatious country club, just as the guests were being seated for the outdoor ceremony. I didn't park in the guest lot. I drove the Mustang right up the manicured lawn, stopping about 50 yards from the aisle, its engine a low, menacing rumble that turned every head. I cut the engine, and the sudden silence was even louder. I got out, dressed not in a suit, but in the clean, simple work clothes from my garage, jeans and a plain black shirt. I was not one of them. I was the man who had paid for all this with his own sweat, and I wanted them to see it. My mother saw me first. Her face, beaming a moment before, contorted into a mask of fury and panic. She scurried over, her heels sinking into the soft grass. "Jake, what in God's name are you doing?" she hissed, trying to physically block me from the guest's view. "You are ruining your sister's day. Look at you, and that car." My father and Tiffany were now staring, their faces a mixture of confusion and anger. "Get out of here now," my father mouthed silently, his face turning purple. "I don't think so," I said, my voice calm and carrying in the quiet air. And just as my father started to march toward me, another car pulled up the long driveway, a simple dark blue sedan. It wasn't a guest, it was a police cruiser. Detective Miller and a uniformed officer got out. They walked past the stunned guests, their gazes fixed on my father. "Jonathan Miller?" Detective Miller asked, his voice professional and devoid of emotion. My father froze. Yes?" The detective didn't waste any time. "You are under arrest for grand theft, auto, and felony fraud." The click of the handcuffs was the loudest sound I had ever heard. The guests gasped. Tiffany let out a piercing shriek. My father, pale and trembling, looked at me with pure hatred. "You did this," he spat. I just looked at him, my expression blank. As they led him past me, I turned to my mother, whose face was a mess of streaming mascara. "You said to do the right thing and support the family," I said softly. "This is me, doing the right thing." I walked away without a backward glance, got into my car and turned the key. The roar of the V8 engine was the only sound as I drove away, leaving behind the smoking crater that was once my family. I didn't need to be there to know what happened next. The news spread through my hometown like wildfire. The wedding, of course, was a catastrophic failure. The guests fled, whispering and gossiping. The caterers, the florist, the venue, they all demanded payment in full for the ruined event, plunging my parents into a financial hole they couldn't possibly climb out of. Tiffany's fiancé, horrified by the scandal and the truth about his future in-laws, broke off the engagement the very next day. His family wanted nothing to do with a family of criminals. In one afternoon, the perfect life my sister and parents had built on my back had been razed to the ground. My father's legal case was swift and brutal. The evidence was undeniable. Faced with a lengthy prison sentence, he pleaded guilty. He was convicted of a felony, sentenced to 5 years of probation, 500 hours of community service, and ordered to pay me $45,000 in restitution, the full assessed value of the car. The felony conviction cost him his job and his reputation. They were forced to sell the house I grew up in to cover the wedding debts and his legal fees. They lost everything. Months later, my mother called me. I almost didn't answer, but I knew I needed to hear it one last time. Her voice was thin, weak, stripped of all its former authority. She was crying. She begged me for money, for help, telling me they were about to be homeless. I listened patiently until she was done. "The court has already determined the full extent of your financial obligation to me," I said, my voice as flat and empty as the garage they had created. "The restitution payments are all I require. Beyond that, we have nothing to discuss." "But I'm your mother," she sobbed. "You were," I replied, But you sold that title, along with my car, for a party dress. Some things can't be bought back. I hung up and blocked her number. Today, I own my own restoration shop. Business is booming. The Mustang sits in the front window of the showroom, a cherry red monument to the day I decided to choose myself. I learned the hardest lesson a person can learn. Sometimes the family you're born into isn't your real family. They were just the people who were supposed to teach you what love wasn't. My revenge wasn't just about a car. It was about taking back my life, my worth, and my future from the people who saw it only as something to be consumed. And as I drive down the highway, the engine roaring, I am finally completely free.